On June 23, 2023, a paramilitary group called the Wagner Group, financed by the Russian Ministry of Defense, raised the flag of rebellion against Putin and the Russian Ministry of Defense. Despite having a structure, tactics, and training similar to a professional army, these mercenaries were part of the Russian armed forces and were led by Prigozhin, a former hot dog vendor who later became Putin's close friend. In a statement on June 23rd, Prigozhin claimed that the government's reasons for invading Ukraine were based on lies and that the invasion was carried out in the interest of wealthy Russians close to Putin. He accused Putin of deceiving the people by portraying Ukraine as a hostile country, collaborating with NATO against Russia. After realizing this, the Wagner Group announced that they didn't want to continue fighting in Ukraine and that they had been bombed by the Russian Air Force, losing nearly 2,000 fighters. Prigozhin also claimed that the Russian Ministry of Defense was hiding the true number of soldiers killed in Ukraine and that the Russian army was losing almost 1,000 soldiers every day. Following these statements, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu ordered the disbandment of the Wagner Group and the incorporation of its soldiers into the Russian army. Prigozhin then decided to take action against the Russian Ministry of Defense, calling on patriotic Russians to take to the streets and announcing that they would move towards Rostov, providing weapons to anyone who supported them. In another message, he called on patriotic soldiers in the Russian army to join their ranks. The Federal Security Service of Russia initiated legal proceedings against Prigozhin for armed rebellion, and the Russian Army and National Guard deployed armored vehicles to key areas in Moscow and Rostov. On the morning of June 24, the Wagner forces stationed in Luhansk set out for Rostov Oblast. They encountered little resistance at Russian checkpoints along the way and arrived in Rostov with ease. Despite the efforts of Russian Deputy Defense Minister Yusuf Yevkurov to stop them, the Wagner convoy entered Rostov and seized the headquarters of the Southern Military District without encountering any resistance. Prigozhin personally directed the operation, planting landmines in the city center and establishing checkpoints in various areas to strengthen Wagner's position. With special permission from Putin, Defense Minister Yunus Yevkurov and Deputy Chief of General Staff Vladimir Alexeyev went to Rostov to negotiate with Prigozhin, but they were unsuccessful in convincing him to withdraw his forces. Shortly after the two generals left the headquarters, gunfire and explosions were heard in various parts of the city. Telecom buildings were bombed by Russian planes, and small skirmishes occurred between Wagner forces and the army in some areas of the city. The conflict ended quickly after the Russian army withdrew from the area. During this time, most businesses in Rostov closed, gas stations had long queues of people, and the municipal government advised residents to stay at home. Some citizens try to stock up on essential supplies, while others attempt to leave the city, causing traffic jams and long queues at the train station. Although some citizens expressed their disapproval of the Wagner forces, the majority began to support them, even providing them with water and food. However, it soon became apparent that the small force engaging in combat with the Wagner forces was made up of Chechen militias. According to the Chechen media, a convoy of Chechen soldiers prepared on the orders of President Kadyrov was moving towards Rostov. After the Wagner forces gained control of Rostov, Prigozhin divided his forces into two groups. One group would stay in Rostov to hold the city, while the other group would advance towards Moscow, surrounding the capital. The Wagner convoy, consisting of tanks, armored vehicles, anti-aircraft guns, and civilian trucks, began to move towards Moscow around noon. According to Russian sources, the convoy, led by Wagner's senior commander Dmitry Yudkin, consisted of about 5,000 people. Although they managed to seize control of several air bases along the way, they didn't attempt to occupy any cities. They advanced as far as Voronezh, but didn't make any further progress towards Moscow. When the Wagner convoy arrived at the Voronezh border, they were attacked by Russian helicopters. The resulting conflict, which began with the Wagner forces responding, resulted in the downing of 6 Russian helicopters and a command and control aircraft, and the loss of more than 200 Russian soldiers. After the conflict ended, the Wagner forces continued their advance and quickly took control of all military facilities in the city of Voronezh. They were now only 550 kilometers away from Moscow. Moscow immediately went on high alert, surrounding the city with tanks and increasing security measures. Highways on the convoy's route were destroyed, bridges were lifted, and trenches were dug in important areas to prevent the passage of tanks. Meanwhile, the Wagner forces began to move towards Lipetsk Oblast, about 400 kilometers away from Moscow. Despite the efforts of the local authorities to prevent the convoy's advance, the Wagner forces were able to reach the city. The governor of Lipetsk declared a curfew and urged all civilians to stay at home. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobya announced that a terrorism alert had been issued in the capital. Fearing for their safety, the people of Moscow rushed to the airports, but soon all flights out of Moscow were reported to be fully booked. An airplane carrying Putin took off from Moscow towards St. Petersburg, but the Kremlin denied the claim that Putin had left the capital. Meanwhile, the Federal Security Service conducted a raid on the Wagner Group's headquarters in St. Petersburg, confiscating 4 billion rubles in cash, weapons, gold bullion, and precious stones like diamonds and rubies. In a statement on the evening of June 24th, Putin declared that this was an attempted coup, and anyone involved would be tried as traitors and receive the punishment they deserved. Prigozhin responded to these claims, stating that they were not traitors but patriotic Russian citizens. He said they marched for justice and didn't intend to overthrow the government. The Wagner forces continued their advance and reached Novomoskovsk, only 220 kilometers away from Moscow. The Russian army and the Wagner forces were now face to face, and the likelihood of heated conflict increased. Putin refused to meet with Prigozhin, so Belarus President Lukashenko took on the role of the mediator. Lukashenko promised to guarantee the security of Wagner forces in exchange for them stopping their advance and returning to their bases. He also promised to negotiate with the Kremlin to secure the Wagner Group's future. After considering Lukashenko's proposal, Prigozhin agreed to the deal to prevent further bloodshed. The Wagner forces began to withdraw from Rostov from around 11 p.m. on June 24th. After a few more issues were discussed, the Wagner forces in Voronezh began to return to their positions in eastern Ukraine on the morning of June 25th. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov announced that the charges against Prigozhin would be dropped and he would be sent into the exile in Belarus. He also announced that the Wagner forces would not be prosecuted and that those who didn't participate in the rebellion would be incorporated into the Russian army. Thus, the attempted coup or rebellion against Putin's government lasted for about 1.5 days before ending. So who were the Wagner Group that dared to challenge such a powerful and dominant leader as Putin? Another question is, where did Prigozhin, the leader of this group, find the strength to defy someone like Putin? Now, let's move on to the answers to those questions. The Wagner Group was founded in Russia in 2010 by Ukrainian-born Colonel Dmitry Yutkin, who served in the special forces. After retiring in 2013, Yutkin led a group of 60 Wagner operatives to fight in the Syrian civil war. However, due to the dispute with the Russian Defense Ministry, Yudkin and all members of the Wagner Group were arrested. All activities of the Wagner Group were then completely banned until Putin's close friend Prigozhin became the new leader. But who was Prigozhin? He grew up in gangs and spent 9 years in prison for theft before being released at the age of 29 in 1990. He started selling hot dogs on the streets with his mother, then entered the market business and became a partner in Contrast, St. Petersburg's first supermarket chain until 1993. Prigozhin entered the restaurant business in 1997 and opened his first restaurant in St. Petersburg. He opened a second restaurant called New Island, which became so famous that it hosted Vladimir Putin, French President Jacques Chirac, US President George W. Bush, and Vladimir Putin's birthday celebration in 2003. By the 2000s, Prigozhin had become increasingly close to Putin, and his catering company, Concord Catering, had won many government contracts, earning millions of dollars. In 2012, Concord Catering won a $1.2 billion contract with the Russian Defense Ministry. Putin eventually offered Prigozhin the leader of the Wagner Group, which he accepted in 2014. The Wagner Group provided security for the Crimean Parliament when it declared independence from Ukraine in 2014, and Wagner operatives were involved in many operations in the Donbass conflict on behalf of Russia. In the 2022 Ukraine-Russia war, it is alleged that the number of Wagner operators involved rose to at least 40,000. Wagner operators were often deployed first, before Russian forces, in operations such as attacks and sieges. The Wagner Group was also deployed to Syria in 2015 and was involved in several clashes with American forces over control of northern oil fields. Wagner operatives provided significant support to Syrian forces during the 2017 Palmyra attacks, the 2017 Syrian army offensive in Deir ez-Zor, and the late 2017 Battle of Deir ez-Zor. In early 2018, Wagner forces suffered heavy losses when they were bombed by American aircraft in the Kashem skirmish, which became the deadliest conflict between Russia and the United States since the Cold War. To date, 266 Wagner operatives have lost their lives in Syrian operations. Since 2013, Wagner forces have been involved in the civil war in South Sudan with the explicit support of the Russian government since 2018. The number of the Wagner forces in South Sudan has surpassed 1,000 since the intensification of the conflict in 2023. In the Central African Republic, Wagner forces have been present since 2018, taking advantage of the security vacuum created by the French army's withdrawal to support the government and protect the president. Wagner forces haven't left the country since then, and their numbers have reached around 2,000 as of 2023. Moving on the Libyan civil war, Wagner forces went to Libya in 2018 to train General Haftar's soldiers and support Haftar. They established bases in Benghazi and Tobruk, quickly solidifying their presence and even securing the safety of oil wells. With the help of Wagner forces, Haftar, who held the capital city of Tripoli, gained the upper hand against the national government supported by the US and Turkey. However, in 2020, the national government with the support of the West managed to drive Wagner forces and Haftar out of Tripoli. Although the Kremlin denies Russian presence in Libya, the number of Wagner forces has surpassed 3,000 as of 2023. So far, we have discussed the activities of Wagner forces that have come to light. It is alleged that the organization has been active in many other countries or is still active. Wagner forces are said to have been involved in many operations on behalf of governments in Mali, Mozambique, Burkina Faso, Chad, Madagascar, Belarus, Moldova, Nagorno-Karabakh, Serbia, and Venezuela. With more than 50,000 elite groups, armored vehicles, tanks, and missiles, it remains to be seen whether this organization will be disbanded or become a headache for Russia. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.